Let's take a fresh look at higher education and the economy in Pennsylvania next on Behind the Headlines.
This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, welcome to a new edition of Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenewalt, Senior Fellow for the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and I'm joined, as usual, by my associate, Maura Donnelly. Maura, welcome to the show.
Hello, Charlie.
Well, Maura, this is a week with lots of developments in higher education.
Yes.
But I think we want to talk about some of the news from higher education that hasn't been in the headlines, and it has indeed been behind the headlines a little bit for the last couple.
That sounds like a great idea.
For the last couple of weeks. And here to do that is one of the top experts on higher education, someone who's been a veteran of our show, and we're happy to welcome him back. And that's Steve Hicks, president of APSCUF. Steve, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Charlie.
It's so nice to have you here again.
Hey, Steve.
And again, Steve is the president of the a union that represents all the faculty at the 14 state universities across the Commonwealth, everyone from my university, Millersville, to Indiana University of Pennsylvania, to Edinburgh, to Kutztown, to California University of Pennsylvania. Well, we've been living for a little bit, Steve, with the budget, with the new budget of Governor Corbett, and we had you here before to talk about the budget of the Corbett administration and some of the proposed cuts. And how did things turn out in the final state budget for the state system and for our 14 universities?
Well, thank you for the question, Charlie. As you say, we got out there quite a bit in the spring after the governor proposed a 54% cut for all of public higher education, both the state-related and the state-owns. In the end, in June, they determined the House and the Senate worked on legislation that went a little bit different place, and we ended up with an 18% cut for the year, which is about $90 million for us. We've been worried about the impact of that. You know, we spent all spring rallying and talking about the impact on students in our universities, and we've done a study that, a survey of our faculty to try and figure out how much impact there was. One of the things that we worried about was the number of students who didn't come back because of the increase in tuition, which was 7.5%, about $435 per person. And our survey indicated 80% of faculty knew of students who did not come back because of the tuition increase.
Okay, wait, 80% of the faculty knew of students, but not 80% of the students.
Right.
Oh, okay.
It's a little hard to put your thumb on student numbers,
right.
You know, who came, who didn't come. I think the one place we can really point at and recognize that the loss of funding meant loss of students is Cheney University, which is down about 300 students from a year ago. Mm-hmm. And a big piece of that is the fact that their Keystone Honors Program, which was a cornerstone of their merit-based aid, was cut, and they did not bring in a freshman cohort this year into that program. They kept enough funding in the end with the help of a number of people in the Senate and the House. Initially was zeroed out in the governor's budget, but that piece clearly has an effect on several hundred students, and there are several hundred students down. So,
well, how have the budget cuts affected the experience that our students have at the 14 campuses, Steve?
Well, again, going back to our survey, and this is what we figured was going to happen. About 70% of our faculty said that they've seen an increase in class size. At 10 of the 14 campuses, they indicated they now have classes over 100, which traditionally we didn't have. It used to be part of our whole pitch about what we did as a university system was we gave you that kind of cheers, everybody knows your name, you know, that one-on-one kind of education, and now we've expanded to a different kind of model where gen ed students much more often have 100-person sections and a different experience. One thing we've been worried about is the quality issue. And clearly, there are studies that indicate that class size and distance ed and those kinds of things change the quality of the educational experience. And the other piece that comes from our mission, from our legislation that started us, is it's supposed to be affordable. And we're running these days at $23,000 average student debt. And it comes a point where you wonder what you mean by affordable. I mean, I'm an English professor, so I spend my life worried about definitions, but affordable and quality, what do those mean? What are those relative to where we are now? I think most people would tell you it's not affordable when it's the second largest debt you take on in your lifetime after your mortgage. So.
Well, and then you've got the added issue of getting out of college and not being able to get a job.
Right.
And that's a big focal point for the Occupy Wall Street, Occupy Harrisburg, Occupy Philly, Occupy just about everywhere.
Right.
One of the biggest issues is that these students are graduating with enormous amounts of debt and not able to pay them back. Where do you see that going? How are we going to fix this?
Well, when you ask about where I see it going, I heard the news this morning that New York cleared out the park overnight. So I don't know where the Wall Street people are going to end up now.
I mean, they have their own separate. There are some big issues on these camps that they've created.
Well,
Right.
they said they'd welcome back at the same space after they clean up the area, but they're not going to be allowed to bring tents
or stay overnight
and tarps.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, it's morphing as we speak. But one of their core issues is coming from the students.
I know. One of the things about the Occupy movement that we relate to is we do teach the 99%. I mean, as Charlie knows from what he does, we service the working class and middle class, lower class of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And if there's going to be a change in their lifestyle and where they're going to go in life, they're going to have to come to a university like one of ours and get an education, get a better job. And clearly the Occupy movement is talking to issues like, you know, how much debt do you take on and how much you burdened by debt. And they also are talking about the opportunities, as you indicated, that we're running 9% unemployment nationwide, and the jobs aren't out there in the same way, and not the same kind of jobs that they used to be. And I think that's one of the things the Commonwealth has to be careful about, is the investment cycle in higher ed. We are in a era where the pie of the state budget seems to be shrinking, and if it continues to shrink, they can't keep cutting higher education, because then you won't have the workforce to attract the jobs, and you get into this cycle where, you know, we'll have brain drain. People will be going out of state to someplace else to get quality jobs. And I think that goes back to the whole Wall Street Occupy movement's trying to get us to invest in the 99%. And I think that's an important feature that we've been working on. We've been very concerned about student debt. We're worried about that tuition increase. That's one of the reasons we worked so hard in the spring to bring the 54% to 18%, was we knew that there would be a concurrent tuition increase to match that. We know the debt levels. There comes a place where, you know, you can't afford to go to college, and you know, you just can't put people in that position and hope for the Commonwealth to be in a good place in terms of the economy.
You're leading directly into our next question, and that is, what about the budget for next year, Steve? There is some talk in Harrisburg about what the budget numbers will be for next year. Do you have any idea what they might be for higher education? What are the expectations regarding the governor's budget, the state's budget, and higher education for next year?
Well, let me start with this year, Charlie, because that's a concern, I think, on the Hill at this point and around the state. If you listen to what's coming out of the governor's mansion. Yesterday morning, the governor announced that they were going to do a mid-year correction of $200 million. And we were on the Hill yesterday and talked to people, and nobody's quite sure exactly where the $200 million figure comes from. Currently, the state's about $320 million below what their expectation on income was for the year. But it looks like with the mid-year briefing that the governor always does with the leaders in the legislature, The governor will announce that he's going to find some way to cut $200 million out of what they passed in June. So that changes your pie. It shrinks it a little bit. We're not exactly sure where the $200 million will come from. Probably you would expect it to be an across-the-board thing from every place you can cut. You remember that the DPW took about a $500 million cut, as I remember. They were supposed to reform, but they haven't clearly done that. So they're not going to go to that 37% of the budget and ask them for another 2%. So I think that's an interesting place to be. First, there's going to be a midterm correction, and then next spring, everything sounds like the budget next year is going to be probably the same or smaller than it was last year when Governor Corbett cut it by, something like $2 billion. So I think this state's in a position where the size of the budget is not growing. I think one of the things you see out of that is public sector jobs are disappearing. The rhetoric all spring was we'll lose school teacher jobs, we'll lose these jobs. And I know the monthly job numbers show the private sector is growing in the Commonwealth, but the public sector is shrinking. We're losing jobs. So any momentum we might have had, we're losing because of the government's no longer hiring as many people, keeping as many people on the payroll. And that gets into your cyclical effect too, and it's not a good place to be. I think in terms of my organization and Charlie's, in terms of faculty across the state, I've seen one number that indicates we're down almost 200 jobs for the year. So those are obviously pretty good paying jobs. They're in communities that are rural, with the exception of the southeast corner of the state. So they make a big difference in terms of the economy across the state. And I think the governor has to be careful that he, by shrinking the pie, he doesn't do more damage than he really wants to, I think.
Well, it sounds like you're getting all of your ducks in order for your budget hearings in the spring, with some information about loss of students and students not returning, loss of good paying jobs, increased debt. You're going to have some interesting comments to make in the spring.
Well, I hope so. I think at this point, I think everybody's lined up with an argument. They've been lined up for some time. I think the current issue on the Hill is the Marcellus Shale issue, and for years everybody's thought that was the panacea, that we'll all get a piece of that. Mm-hmm. I don't want to use the pie metaphor again necessarily, but we'll all get a piece of that. And it looks like no one is going to get a piece of that. I think locals are going to get a little bit of it. But I think it's troubling that the state's income is where it's at. I think we all hoped it would do better. I think, as you discussed with people on the Hill, we would be far better off if we had 3 or 4% growth in terms of the state economy, instead of we're kind of putzing along at about 1. Yeah. 1
stagnant,
plus.
Basically.
Yes, yeah, it's pretty flat line. Yeah. I think a whole lot of people are going to be lined up, and DPW for one. The K through 12 people took almost $1 billion hit last year. I think everybody is going to have an argument to make, but again, I think the governor's counter argument is, I don't have the money. So, yeah. And that's the place we've been for some time, and until the economy turns around in the state, I think we're all going to fight with each other for small slices of pie.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, on that note, but it is interesting, because the traditional wisdom has always been, in a time of economic recession or depression, this is when you really have to invest in higher education.
Right.
Higher education is one of your ways out, and it's a way to prepare for changing times and for a better future. And so some of the things that we see from time to time can be baffling, I think, Steve.
It's good to have you hitting my talking points there, Charlie.
I hadn't seen them.
No, but no, I think it has been a traditional way of getting out, and I think one of the things you look at is, our competitors economically overseas as you look to Asia, China, and India are both investing a lot more in higher education per capita than they used to. Everybody in the United States, most states are decreasing their funding of higher education. And you wonder, we keep talking about being competitive, staying number one. As you say, how do you do that as you disinvest in public higher education? And I think the answer is you can't, and people need to recognize that as a policy, both in the Commonwealth and across the nation, that unless you want to get swept behind those countries, we need to be investing in higher education. Makes a big difference economically.
Okay. Well, thank you for being with us, giving us an update, Steve. We look forward to having you in after the new year and seeing where we stand then. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. We'll be right back with the second segment of Behind the Headlines right after this. Remember, you can catch us on YouTube and you can catch us on the archives of the Voice of PA. We'll be right back.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania Business Council, envisioning a commonwealth in which residents enjoy a very high quality of life in sustainable communities. The Council works aggressively to define key long-term policy strategies and solutions that make the Commonwealth more competitive, creating and sustaining a better Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by Daily Express, transporting construction, farm, and industrial equipment throughout the United States. And by Penn Waste, your best local choice for your waste removal and recycling needs.
Welcome back. In this segment, we're very pleased to have the brand new president of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, Gene Barr. And Charlie and I have some great business questions for Gene, and we're gonna really find out what's going on, what his vision of the Pennsylvania Chamber is, and want to welcome you to the show.
And
Great to be here.
congratulations
Thank
on
you
your
very
new
much.
congratulations on your new position.
Thank
Gene.
you very much. Great to be here with you.
Well, let's start out by, you've been with the Chamber for how many years?
About 8.5 years.
8.5 years, and now you're going to be leading the organization.
Right.
Largest statewide business organization in Pennsylvania.
Right.
What do you see as your vision for the organization going forward?
Well, it's an interesting point because we talk a lot about what things we need to do. And I was at a function yesterday and somebody said, well, we talk a lot about what we need to do. Talk a little bit about what Pennsylvania's strengths are. And that's a great point. Because Pennsylvania has some phenomenal strengths when you look at our educational institutes, our access to population centers, our transportation, which does need work, but is certainly a positive, our natural resources like water, et cetera. And I think what it comes down to is, let's make sure that the negatives in Pennsylvania, our tax structure, our labor structure, our legal structure, don't outweigh the positives Pennsylvania can bring to the table.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And in summary, that's what I think we'd like to do. Let's acknowledge the positives. Let's work on the negatives. We've taken some strides the first 6 months of this year. Legal reform, a new budget that doesn't do taxes, any kind of increase. Those are positives. Let's move those forward.
Great.
The Corbett administration certainly has made strides on a number of issues that make Pennsylvania more business friendly, haven't it, Gene?
Absolutely. I mean, when you think about it, if you compare 2011 to 1991, what a difference 20 years makes. In 1991, we were, I think, $1 billion in the hole. Did $3 billion in new taxes to close that because we had to go get all the votes necessary to do it. Here we had a $4 billion gap. No tax increases. We did legal reform. We made important changes on unemployment compensation reform, and now we're moving forward. Those things are positives.
So Pennsylvania actually is one of the best states in the whole of the Northeast in terms of its budgetary situation. And that brings us back, though, to the fact, though, that we still have been, over the last generation, hemorrhaging a lot of manufacturing jobs. The manufacturing sector is, in the minds of many, the cornerstone of the middle class in America. And without a middle class, it's hard to keep a democracy running. And I guess, what do you foresee for your administration and for the Chamber in trying to work with the business sector to rebuild manufacturing, restore manufacturing in Pennsylvania? Or what are your thoughts on this?
You know, we talk a lot about, and I know people might think you're overemphasizing it, but we talk a lot about what the Marcellus Shale development can bring. And it's obvious when you talk about the energy. But if you probe a little deeper, what the Marcellus will allow us to do is attract companies that are energy intensive, because we've got relatively cheaper source of natural gas now. Also, natural gas can be an important input for a lot of manufacturing processes, particularly kind of the wet gas side that's more prevalent out in the western part that has additional liquid hydrocarbons. So this Marcellus play is so critical for how we move forward as a Commonwealth, and is so important to economic development that it's almost impossible to overstate it, which is why that it's so disconcerting at certain points to see that, because unfortunately over the years I've worked in other states. Pennsylvania, unfortunately, with certain folks that are anti-job, anti-business, take the different tack, that are denigrating business, attacking business, particularly larger businesses. And unfortunately, we're seeing some of that in the Marcellus as well. You're seeing people say, gee, they're not paying any taxes. It's completely wrong. They're getting a free pass. Completely wrong. This is an industry that came in, didn't ask for any state tax dollars, is providing almost immediate benefits to the Commonwealth. And yeah, there's environmental protections that need to be done, there's work that needs to be done, but it really is tough to overstate how important the Marcellus development is to Pennsylvania, not only for the energy side, but for manufacturing.
So there's more to Marcellus Shale than just the revenue implications? Absolutely,
okay. Absolutely. I mean, talk about the employment situation. I know the other complaint, I served on the Marcellus Commission, Governor Corbett appointed me. One of the things that we typically hear is, oh gee, they're not hiring anybody from Pennsylvania. 75% of the new hires are from Pennsylvania. They really do want to hire Pennsylvanians. The problem is, particularly at the start, the last oil and natural gas rush that Pennsylvania had was 1859. Most of those people are gone now.
The experience
the experience has been gone for a while, so we had to bring in some other people.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So we've had to change that. So, but it is critical, and it is important to say, good, we're going to put the appropriate protections on this industry. They're going to be paying their tax dollars as they should. But it's funny when you hear people here, they're not paying their fair share. Unfortunately, with a lot of these groups, not fair share means I don't know what you're paying, but I know that I want more from you. That's a euphemism. So
are you joining with some of the other business groups on a lot of these issues, Marcellus in particular?
Absolutely. I think that it's critical as we move Pennsylvania forward and address those issues that we know need to be done. It worked on legal reform. It worked on so many other things where all of us, PMA, the Business Council, NFIB, and all of the other trade associations, along with our colleagues across the lobbying side, joined together to come up with a more effective coalition moving forward. It's the only way that we're going to advance these issues.
Oh, that's great.
Well, Gene, if you were, the Chamber has a long and illustrious history here in the Commonwealth, and as you look into the future, what specific, if you can, I don't know if you're willing to do so at this point, as much as you're able to share with us, what initiatives are you planning for the Chamber to embark on in the next year or throughout your tenure?
Sure.
Can you share any of those?
I'll be happy to do that. And we've touched on a couple of those already. One is that we've got the highest effective corporate net income tax rate in the United States. When you combine it with the federal rate, we're among the highest in the world. And Japan, which was #1, is working to move theirs down. So we have to address that. Along with New Hampshire, we have the worst tax treatment for business operating losses in the United States. That has to change. We need additional reforms on legal. We have to change our labor structure more. We still have unemployment comp and workers' comp issues. And there's a couple of issues the legislature is debating this fall. For example, the education side, absolutely crucial, because we are not getting the return on investment that we need and have to get to make Pennsylvania successful. So we know from our perspective as an organization that supports competition, we believe competition in the education world needs to work and must be put into place. Privatization is another one. There's no reason for this Commonwealth to be involved in the sale of alcoholic beverages. The private sector sells tobacco, we sell pharmaceuticals, no reason why you can't safely and effectively sell alcohol as well. Those are just real quick, and that's enough to work on for a while, along with making sure that we continue to grow the Marcellus industry.
Well, that sounds a little bit like a Corbett campaign speech. So you've got, we know you have the support of the governor. What are some of your biggest obstacles in getting this agenda through?
Well, look, you've got people on the other side. We've noted some who are entrenched. You know, Pennsylvania is a very strong organized labor state, particularly on the government sector side. And as we noted earlier, they're running commercials against, for example, the Marcellus industry. They've run commercials against many in the business side. They'd like to see things stay the same. They fought against changes in the pension structure. Pennsylvania needs to make changes in the way that we pay out pensions. We simply can't afford to proceed anymore. 50 years ago, it was different when you could retire at 62 or 63 when life expectancy was 66 or 67. It's not that way anymore. We can't, as a society, afford to continue with the same demographic basis that we had 50 years ago.
A lot of our disadvantage, if you will, in terms of manufacturing and in the world of commerce comes from competing with a lot of products and that are derived from the Middle East, particularly not the Middle East, the Far East, excuse me, from China. How do we compete with what amounts to slave labor from China, Gene? What can Pennsylvania manufacturers do to deal with that difference?
Well, I think you're seeing some changes in China based on what we're seeing. You're seeing more of a rise in the middle class, people in China who want more, who want what we've had.
Their wages are going up.
Their wages are going up. So I think you're going to see some upward pressure on that. Certainly you've had people talk about, gee, I think we ought to buy American. And to the extent that people make a conscious, willful, voluntary decision to do that, to me, that's the essence of the free market system. If people say, I want to focus on an American-made, even a Pennsylvania-made product, and they do that voluntarily, that's tremendous. That's the free market working. So I think those are some very conscious things we can make. And again, work on our strengths to where we can rebuild manufacturing. Part of that really does go to the education system. It means more emphasis on science, technology, engineering, and math, which unfortunately, here in the U.S., we haven't had our kids going into as much as possible. We need to re-emphasize that. There was a great story by Tom Friedman, New York Times, and I don't agree with everything he says across the board, but he talked about the decline of the middle class, and we hear all this about jobs going overseas. He summed it up to me in just a couple of sentences. He tagged it to education. And he said, you know what, years ago, we could go overseas, our companies, and buy cheap labor. Now we can buy cheap geniuses, because we've got people overseas who have gotten that, who now know that the way to advance is through higher education. They're coming here. The number of kids coming in here with SAT scores that are perfect from foreign countries is amazing. They're taking their knowledge back over there, and they're beating us with it. We've got to get our kids in tune with that.
Well, they're starting to teach English to the kindergartners in China, which
and
is
we don't do much
remarkable.
teaching of Mandarin Chinese
we
to our
don't.
kindergartners. That's
No,
right.
we don't.
That's something that I try to emphasize to everyone who will listen at the university level and in our community, that we need to be teaching Chinese and Arabic, for example.
Absolutely should.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's a global economy.
Okay. Well, Gene, we want to thank you very much for being with us today.
It's great to be here. I really appreciate it.
Look forward to having you come back. And,
love to come back.
Congratulations again.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank
want
you.
to congratulate you on your new position. So
Thank you.
we want to thank all of you for being with us for this episode of Behind the Headlines. We remind you, you can catch us on YouTube, and you can see all our shows archived on thevoiceofpa.net. We'll see you next week. Maura and I are looking forward to it. See you then.